Hello and welcome to Microsoft Digital Now. I'm Andrew Wilson, Microsoft's Chief Digital Officer. Today, technology is at the heart of every business. Its mission criticality, its speed is something we're all having to deal with. On this series of conversations, I'm looking forward to speaking with friends, industry leaders, both within Microsoft and across the industry, about how they're tackling digital and wider business transformation. So let's get to it. Joining us now, I'm delighted to say, is Jared from Microsoft. Jared, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
You have spent the last several years looking at the transformation of work, both in terms of the dialogue we're having with our customers, the reaction to the pandemic, and also how our research has helped fuel our own thoughts and the direction we've taken. Could you talk us through some of that and what you've seen and what you think the major themes have been?
Oh, it'd be a pleasure. I mean, so much is on my mind when I think about this. You know, last year we started this big survey of 31,000 people across 31 countries. And one of the biggest things we found as we repeated that survey this year is that people have changed so dramatically how they think about work. And I think that's one of the biggest, most durable trends we'll see. For instance, they've decided over 50% of workers around the world now are prioritizing their health and well-being over their work. And that's a marked change from before the pandemic.
That's huge in terms of the old relationship with your employer, the old contract, and perhaps a sense of where the power balance was in that relationship. Is this change permanent? Do you think it's still changing?
You know, so many people out there right now are just starting to say, well, what about the economy? As the economy gets tighter, as the labor market gets tighter, will things swing back? I certainly think that there will be a moderation. We won't see kind of the almost anything goes effect that we've had over the last 2 years. I just don't think we'll swing all the way back to 2019. And I think that many of the changes we've seen in flexibility with work, and that's really going to be the dominant theme, flexibility in how, when, and where you work, those are going to be very, very durable, I think, over time.
What in the research surprised you most, perhaps in the first year and then in the second year?
First year, it was really all about, I guess what I'd call the hybrid paradox. It was this idea that people really appreciated flexibility. In fact, over 70% of the respondents said they did, but almost the same number said that they wanted more in-person time with their colleagues as well. So a lot of reporting has been done on this idea of like, please let me stay at home and work. What they aren't covering is that people want to be back in. They want that social time. They want those connections with their colleagues. That's very important. So that was year one. Year two really started to get us to this conundrum that we all find ourselves in. And maybe I shouldn't be so surprised now, but the big one that popped out to me is like, why the office? People couldn't quite figure out what an office was for because they realized, oh, if we're not going to have those same kind of 9-to-5 patterns, well, how do I decide when I go in and what will happen when I do get in?
There was a lot of focus, wasn't there, early on, I remember, around could a workforce be productive and monitoring that workforce, perhaps trusting it or not trusting it. And a lot of measures were being discussed about how do we ensure people are really working. It felt like people were working harder and harder and longer and longer. Did that come through in the research?
It did indeed. That wasn't based on survey results, but instead based on our telemetry. We've actually seen since the beginning of the pandemic that the workday span, so from the beginning of first login to the last log off, that's increased on average across the world by 45 minutes. So we've seen that people are working longer. We've also seen greater intensity, what we now call a 3-peak workday. Always been a peak mid-morning, always been a peak after people come back from lunch. Now there's a new peak. They're actually starting to work between 8 and 10 p.m. their local time. So the idea, if you feel like you're working more, well, the data bears that out. And people are kind of feeling like it's picking up steam with no end in sight. So that's also caused a little bit of anxiety.
Raising questions about the sustainability of it.
Indeed.
And the quality of life.
Indeed.
Which seems to fly in the face of this sense of entitlement and flexibility. Other organizations, you've spent a lot of time, I know, in market, talking to different customers, different industries across the world. How did you find organizations dealing with this? Are they dealing with this? Is there a playbook? Is it still changing? Where are they looking next?
Well, if I sound convincing to you, then I'm doing too good of a job. I really don't know where everything is going. We're doing our best to chart out the trends. If I look at organizations, the folks who have had the hardest time, the roughest time, are those who decided they knew what it was going to look like, and they took a policy-based approach. We're going to set new policies. We're coming back. Here's what we're going to do. Unfortunately, both the pandemic and I would say the labor markets have had different ideas. And so I would just say never put yourself in front of the Mack truck that is a pandemic or a labor market or some big force that you're not going to be able to control. And it's best to be flexible and kind of be in learn-it-all mode. That's been the most successful approach that we've seen just all across the world.
That's a high point in terms of how organizations have reacted. What's probably a low point for you that you've seen that you wouldn't advise? Where did they get it wrong?
Well, over 50% of the bosses that we surveyed earlier this year said that they were going back to 5 days a week in person. Forget the flexibility. That was a thing in the past. Even those who were flexible, some of them said, yeah, we'll be really flexible. By the way, we want you on Monday, Tuesday, and Friday. And that has not gone very well for them either. So I think that there is structure needed around that flexibility, but I think you have to be careful. What people really value is being able to bend their work around their lives, that sense that they can kind of live and that they work to live. If you start to bump up into that, I think many people are kind of kicking back against it.
Certainly as a leader myself of an organization, with lots of people learning their way forward, I found one size did not fit all. And one had to be really careful, as a leader and as a manager to both set the tone, but allow the guide rails to be sufficiently flexible so that we could find a way forward. And I certainly find that most leaders who I think are impacting well are taking that philosophy forward.
Yeah, agreed.
So the technology side of this, we haven't talked tech yet. Microsoft is a technology company. We solve the world's problems with technology, don't we? Do you think that technology has changed now and will change? And where do you think tech's role in supporting this new way of life, a new way of work is going? Where would you predict that?
Has it changed?
2 minutes.
We started the pandemic with Microsoft Teams being able to have a total of 4 people on the screen. That was the beginning of my March 2020. We have done so much. I think if I look at last count, we're over 1,000 new features we've added to the product. We really have been trying to listen to the market and listen to our customers and make sure that we're evolving that. The role of tech, though, if I take a step back, we are a technology company, but when I speak with customers, I do something that I think surprises them. I say, don't start with the technology. You've got to start with your view, your kind of made up picture in your head that you share with other leaders in your company for what work looks like. And sometimes to make that concrete, I'll say the patterns and the norms of work at your company. You've got to decide, are there certain core working hours? How flexible is flexible? Do you want people all in so that they see each other in an office? What is that office for? You have to kind of answer many of those questions. When you have those answers, then you can use technology to implement your vision of where things are headed. But if you try to use technology and have that guide your vision, it turns into a mess, because it just doesn't have any direction.
I know when CDOs, CIOs, CTOs visit here, and I am in discussion with them as well, like you, the first hour is around culture. It's around how will the ethos of the company's paradigm for work be evolved. And the technologist's role appears to be to help with this. So there's never been a better time to be in tech, is what I tend to say. At the same time, a lot of it isn't about the actual tech itself. It's around taking on that role at the C-suite with the board and setting that direction as the sort of company transformation officer, which I think is what's so exciting. Now, we hear about the metaverse, don't we? So will this solve everything?
People are either scared of the metaverse or think it'll solve all problems. There aren't a lot of people in between right now.
It's the new internet.
Indeed.
It replaces everything. We'll be living in it all the time.
That's what people say.
And yet it's brand new and unproven.
Yes.
So your views on where it will sit?
I think of it this way. The metaverse is nothing more or less than the kind of deepening, the becoming more richer of digital experiences. I like to help people start by saying, hey, over the past 2.5 years, we have really moved almost every human interaction in business to digitally mediated means. We live in digital spaces. We have now for that amount of time. And when you start there, I think first the metaverse seems less scary. Then second, I say, well, what can the metaverse add? Well, it can add a sense of connection, a depth of connection, a sense of truly being in a shared space together that you don't get today. And that's very valuable. But I don't think it's all or nothing. I think we'll go from, for instance, where we start today, you'll see the addition of things like avatars, which are, interesting and controversial, to the addition of almost augmented reality, where we can project digital things into physical spaces. And then finally to this fully immersive type of experience that people often think of as virtual reality. There are many innovations along the way, and I think people will be very surprised by how helpful they are in creating that connection. Ultimately, it's the connection that matters most.
And that connection extends into the employee experience and the employee relationship, as we talked about earlier. And we have Viva now as well. Viva, I know as a practitioner of it myself, is giving us huge new telemetry on how the workforce is behaving, and will give managers insights into their team that they've never had before. Are organizations ready for this? And does the average manager who's just successfully navigated their team through the pandemic now know how and when it's appropriate to use this telemetry, and perhaps when it's not as well?
In a word, no. It turns out not at all. A lot of people who entered into the pandemic as managers and leaders had been trained through essentially kind of the old organizational model. Not everyone, but a lot of that was absorbing how an organization is doing by walking around and understanding the connections. Well, today you can't do that, and you do need to rely on telemetry more than ever, even if you just have a distributed workforce. But what telemetry to pay attention to? There's so much data. How you should interpret that data, how you use that data, not just as a leader, but with your entire organization, boy, that is a field that is really ripe for opportunity. And I would just come back to your idea of like, as a technologist today, it may be the golden era of being a technologist in business, because you get to facilitate the conversations about what's important, about culture, about how we will make transformation in our organizations. It's once in a generation opportunity. And so that's what I see as what's right in front of us right now.
Big topics. Today we're talking about that transformation of work, but if you think about sustainability, if you think about code being democratized in the enterprise and everybody can build enterprise technology, well, that's flying in the face of what we used to say, isn't it? And then, of course, who owns the data? There are so many themes here that conversations like this, I think exploring and changing that playbook for the next chapter is what we're all about. Now, we don't have that much time with you today. Thank you very much for joining us. But just before you go, let's find out a little bit more about the Jared outside of work, given that you're not working 24/7 for your 3 Ps. What was your dream job before you joined Microsoft? Before you graduated, when you were a child, not that many years ago, perhaps, but
it's very kind of you. I remember being 5 years old and picking up a Star Wars action figure and thinking, man, if I could just make something like this for the world, it would be my dream job. So I think I always dreamed of being able to do something that would just help the world. And as a 5-year-old, Star Wars action figures were it. So I think that's where I was.
Space. Mm-hmm. And then during the pandemic, when we were all working remotely, what hobbies and interests occupied you and perhaps developed or were brand new for you?
2. First one, my mom was very proud. I stopped piano lessons when I was in 5th grade, and I wasn't a very good piano player. And I picked it up again during the pandemic and can play now. And I actually showed her the other day, and she said, finally, my money has been put to good use. So that was the first one. Second one, I decided I wanted to learn a new language, and I've been trying to learn how to speak Spanish.
Ah, very, very useful, particularly with a man who travels, mixed with customer, and I know brings so much to the topics that we've been speaking about. Thanks very much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Before you go, we'd just like to share a little gift with you on behalf of everyone on Digital Now. I didn't know about the piano or indeed the Spanish, but after we searched your bio and scraped the internet and the metaverse, we knew that you're a man of science and we knew that you like to reach for the stars. So I wanted to share with you a little bit about my hobby that I've had during the pandemic, which has been building things. And so on behalf of all of us, if I could share with you this as a little thank you. I'm also familiar with your bookcase behind you in your very nice room on all of the conference calls. So I'm hoping to see this there next Tuesday, if that's okay. Jared, on behalf of everybody on Digital Now, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for the insights and happy building.
Thank you very much.